I'd like to tell you a story, a Hasidic story, and then I'd like to hear how it strikes you, what you hear in it, what you would want to comment on it. There was a Hasidic Rebbe. One of the things that Hasidic Rebbes do is to distribute charity. And they get the money to distribute charity from contributions from people who give it to them for that purpose. So a man came in to the Rebbe and said, listen, I was on my deathbed. The doctors gave up hope. And I said that if I recover, I will give 400 rubles, which in those days was a large sum of money, to charity. And here it is. I'm giving it to you to give out to charity. Put it on the table, and he left. The next person coming in was looking for money. He said, listen, Rabbi, I have a daughter, and she's of marriageable age, and we have a suitable match for her, but the required investment in setting the couple up is 400 rubles, and I don't earn that kind of money in 3 years, so I need your help to provide that money for the marriage. So the Rebbe said, look, this can't be an accident that this fellow left me 400 and the very next fellow needs exactly 400. So he gave the 400 rubles to him to marry off his daughter. Now, he wasn't expecting that. He was expecting the Rebbe to promise and over time to send him contributions, so forth and so on. So he was overjoyed that now he had all the money he needed to complete the match. He walked out. 2 minutes later, the Rebbe said to his private secretary, to his Gabbai, find that fellow and get him back. Well, the Gabbai runs out, locates him, brings him back, and the Rebbe says, you still have the money? He says, sure, right here. He said, put it on the table. Puts it on the table. Please wait outside. Waits outside. 2 hours go by. The Rebbe calls him back in and says, take the money and marry off your daughter. Well, I guess he's relieved, to be relieved of the doubt, and he takes the money and goes off. Now, if you are the private secretary to a Rebbe, you're in a very advantageous position. You get to ask questions. And the question is, what happened here? You gave him the money, and then you called him back, and then 2 hours went by and you gave it to him again. What happened? So the Rebbe said, I'll tell you what happened. I gave him the 400 rubles, and then the thought occurred to me, how much good will it do to give 400 rubles to one person? Maybe giving 20 gifts of 20 would do more good, the marginal utility of money if you've studied some economics. So I decided that I had to make a decision between two alternatives. And I hadn't thought of it before, and so I decided to think about it. In the meantime, I didn't want him to disappear with the money. Okay, the next question the Gabbai asks, of course, is, how did you make your decision to give him the money? And he said, because I thought back in my mind, how did the second position occur to me? In what form was it expressed in my mind when I thought maybe it would be better to give 20 packages of 20? And I realized it was presented this way. No, don't give all the money to one person. Spread it around. And since the source of that second thought was, no, don't give the money, I knew that that thought was coming from what we call the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. And that's how I decided not to do it. What do you hear in a story like that? What can you learn from or question or comment on a story like that? What is it talking about? Yeah.
To not always invest all your eggs in one basket, pretty much.
Let's see, to not always invest. Okay, that's interesting that you should say that. You're hearing that from the fact that you raised the question. In other words, in the end, he did give all the money to one person.
Yeah, and the person suggested to like diversify it and give it to numerous people.
Oh, I'm sorry. This story didn't get across clearly. No, let me try it again and get the actual facts across clearly. The Rebbe's first thought was to give it to this fellow to marry off his daughter, not to share it with anybody else. Then he thought, maybe I shouldn't give it to one person at all. I should, the Rebbe, give it to 20 people. So 20 people will benefit. Making his decision between those two alternatives took him to the 2 hours. And then he decided in the end to give all the money to the one person to marry off his daughter. So in the end, he gave all the money to one person for one purpose. Now, I could take your remark from the fact that he raised the question. If he raised the question, that means that it's relevant to consider whether it should all go to one place or it should be spread out. That means sometimes it's probably right to spread it out. I think that's right. But in the end, the decision was to give it all to one person. Okay, what else do you hear?
That he immediately thought that because he thought of something different, that it's a Yetzer Hara, when both cases were still doing good. So it's an interesting, just because it has a negative connotation doesn't necessarily mean it's Yetzer Hara right away.
Okay, listen, let me spell out what I hear you saying. First of all, both thoughts are to give the money away. Neither of them is to put it in my safe, and take a trip to Acapulco. That wasn't the option. So both of them are good. Giving money to help other people is definitely good. So why would he say that the second one was an expression of his evil inclination? So what did he say? He said because the formula that occurred to my mind was, don't give it to this one, rather give it to many. And you're sort of asking, why does that change anything? In the end, people are going to get it, people are going to enjoy it. Why would you call that evil? Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think it's important to question your own motives, especially, or maybe not especially, but when even if you're choosing two good things,
Okay, so he's now pointing out that there's another dimension here of your motives. And that's a separate dimension which could be considered and could have an effect on your judgment. What else? What else do people hear in the back?
It's like in that situation, the rabbi's in a position to be the mediator between God and the couple trying to get married. And being given the $400 immediately before is God saying this is for them in a certain sense. So by him having his own free will decision and potentially saying, no, I'm going to deviate, because everybody does have that choice of free will. By saying, no, I'm going to give it to a bunch of different people, that could be stepping in the way of faith.
It could be what?
It could be stepping in the way of fate if he decides to give it out to many people when it should be going to the couple in the first place.
Okay, so now you're offering another consideration to help make the decision. Okay, and I think that's certainly a very important consideration, whether the extent to which we think that there is such a thing as fate, or the extent to which we think our first impression is somehow guaranteed to be correct, or maybe when we think about it, or wait a week and think about it, or talk to other people about it, we'll come to a different impression. And maybe the second impression is better. All of that, I think, is relevant to decision-making in general. But remember that here, he made his decision not on that basis. He made his decision on a different basis. Yeah.
Because Yitzhara mostly operates in the present tense, while Western inclination. So Yitzhara can say just do it better, so you don't do it now. And because he received the no, don't do it now, he understood that it's a message from Yitzhara, because Yitzhara otherwise would create something different.
Okay, I think that you're reading his words carefully. I don't know if we have to put in the now. It could be that there are 20 people outside the door to whom he can give it to right away. It's not the now, but the emphasis, the way I heard the story was, the second thought came with a no, don't give it. The root was hold back. Don't give it away. Of course, not don't steal it. It's money meant for charity. No, don't give it to him. Give it to him. Now, it does sound like his focus here is internal and psychological rather than external and consequential. He's not measuring which one will do the most good for the recipients. He's measuring where does it come from in me? What part of my character, what part of my psychology is going to be expressed by doing this? And this introduces a dimension which I think is largely missing from contemporary philosophy and ethics. I'm speaking as someone who taught philosophy for 10 years. And in political discussion and normal social discussion, and that is what's called virtue ethics. What does it mean to be a virtuous person, a good person? In addition to doing good actions. They aren't the same. You said it when you talk about motives, because you talk about motives, yeah. Where question the motives. Now the question is, what's the exact relevance of motives? Some people think, well, if I have bad motives, I'm going to do bad actions, and then people are going to get hurt. That's true. That's true. But the question is that the only consideration? Let me give you an example and see how you react to the example. This is fiction. In this fiction, I have a friend, George, and my friend George has sticky fingers. When he walks into stores, he steals stuff. I should move to Los Angeles. It's less than $950. He won't be prosecuted. And it's a problem. He even acknowledges that it's a problem. It's just, that's what he does. I've talked to him about it, and he just persists. I happen to know he's going to Beijing on business. I say to him, George, in Beijing, they don't like stealing. They have policemen, plainclothes policemen, cameras everywhere, and if they catch you stealing, they cut off your hand. So I'm recommending to you, while you're in Beijing, don't steal. And for some unaccountable reason, he believes me, and doesn't Google it to find out. And he goes to Beijing, and while he's in Beijing, he doesn't steal. And let's say he's delayed there on business for 6 months and then dies in Beijing. The last 6 months of his life, he doesn't steal. Has he had 6 months of a morally ideal life because he didn't steal?
Well, technically, but no.
Okay, technically, but no. Where's the no coming from?
Because it's not his own choice, free will. I don't want to steal. He's just freaked out, so he's doing it from a different reason.
Okay, let's try that. It's not his own free will. He just freaked out. It could be that he freaked out. It could be that he's become, like hypnotized or like in a panic. But it could be, I think, that he just makes a calculation. What's more important, the $150 I can steal or my right hand? That's not a hard one. My right hand is much more important to me than the $150. So it's a bad deal to steal over here because I'm going to pay too much for it. That wouldn't mean he's out of... When you put pressure on someone, let's say you put a gun to a person's head and say, do X or I'll kill you. Does he have free will?
I mean, has a will, has a possibility to die.
After all, haven't people with guns to their heads said no? Many times in history. I'm not only talking about religious martyrs. I'm talking about spies who are captured by the other country and say, reveal who your comrades are and where they are, and they say no and die. So the fact that you're put under pressure, the fact that you have a threat to you, doesn't mean you lose your free will. It might. A person might panic. That could happen. But it doesn't have to happen. Could be you say, listen, I don't do this. I don't reveal my comrades, and I'd rather die than do that, and make a decision. So the fact that he decided not to steal because he was afraid of getting caught and being punished in that drastic way doesn't mean that he lost his free will. Still, is his moral position an ideal moral position? Or could you think that there was something missing in his moral position?
I think his moral position is justified, but it comes down to intent. And his intent originally had negative repercussions to it. But because he was given a set of different perspectives to adhere to, that's what changed his intentions. So I think his morality is skewed, but to an extent.
Okay, now let's try to import some of his old morality into his new condition. How much has changed? How much has changed in his morality?
Nothing. You're just scared he's going to lose his hand.
I don't think anything's changed in his morality. Just the circumstances have changed and the consequences. I mean, it's the same thing here. Like if you steal in America, just because you get away with it here doesn't mean you're going to get away with it in a foreign country. And if nobody tells you that, oh, you're going to get your hand chopped off, all these, you're gonna get your hand chopped off, and you go to a foreign country and steal, there was no external circumstance trying to stop you from stealing.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying as this. He started out with, I'm doing what's good for me and nothing else matters. That's why I steal. He goes to Beijing, and now he doesn't steal because he's afraid of getting his hand chopped off. What's his morality? I'm doing what's good for me and nothing else matters. What's good for me here is not to steal because I don't want to lose my hand. If I were back in America, I would steal. Wouldn't morality require that you do what's right because it's right? Rather than doing what's right because it pays? Doing what's right in principle because it's the right thing to do. That's a person who's being moral, who's committed to morality, rather than the person for whom the moral choice just happens to be convenient, and that's why he's doing it. So leading an ideal moral life is not enough just to do the right actions. What you need to do is do the right actions for the right reasons. And that person hasn't achieved it. Well, what reasons you have goes back to what he says about motivation. Right? What reasons you have depends upon who you are, what's important to you, what your priorities and values are. That's an internal matter, not an external matter. They're related, obviously. Who you are and what your priorities are and values are does affect what you do, but it's not, what you do isn't all that matters. The Torah has a two-pronged moral approach. One is for your actions, that your actions should be correct actions, just actions, charitable actions, and also for the development of your character. And that means that when you make a decision, you think on two tracks. One track is, if I do this, what will happen to the people around me, people I affect, people who are watching me and taking example from me? What effect will it have on the world around me, which is definitely an important, crucial track to have in mind and think about and make judgments about. But also, what will it do to me? And if you take into account both tracks, you'll find that you'll have far more reasons for your choices than you had before. You'll have far more meaning in your choices than you had before. Imagine the following scenario, which I imagine everyone here has had multiple times. It's Sunday afternoon. What am I going to do today, Sunday afternoon? I'm up to date. I'm up to date in my relationships. I'm up to date in my things that I owe to people and responsibilities. It's a free Sunday afternoon. I can do anything I want. Go mountain climbing, play chess, read a book, schmooze with some friends. It's up to me, whatever I want to do. Play doubles tennis. That's if I'm only concerned with my responsibilities to others and my relationships with others. But suppose I think about myself, my character, my motivations, and I think, I have a bit of a problem, and that is when something requires of me strenuous physical effort, I avoid it. I just don't want to. I don't want to make the effort. So now, if I'm choosing this afternoon between mountain climbing and playing chess, maybe I should go mountain climbing, so as to become less resistant to physical effort, so that when the time comes that's required of me to make a physical effort, I won't avoid it just because of the effort. I'll be able to think, is it worth it or isn't it worth it? Is it important or isn't it important? And do the right thing. So I think in terms of building my character, that will give me many more reasons for making the choices that I make. There are people who are supremely competitive. When they play doubles tennis, they play to win. Every ace is another notch on the belt. And when they win, they jump over the net, they grab the other guy's hand and say, "Gotcha! Crushed you! We won!" But, when he's all alone meditating, he thinks, it's really not nice to be that way. Why am I so addicted to winning? And if I win, why wouldn't you want to compliment the other person on his game and give him encouragement? So he thinks, I really should work on this. And maybe I should play doubles tennis this afternoon to struggle with these negative elements of my character so as to be able to become a more supportive person, a more encouraging person, and a less reflexively competitive person where I have to win. Then that'll be better than sitting home and reading in the afternoon. It's a complex social situation in which you can develop his social skills. So both of these dimensions need to be taken into account, because only in that way do you improve the overall quality of your moral life. I want to illustrate this again with a story. This is a story that I made up and it was published. And I think it helps illustrate this in a way that brings out some other points as well. I want you to imagine a father, older father, nowadays older means like 106, and he has two sons, both of whom are dedicated to the father. And he has needs at that age, and sometimes he calls one son or the other or both, and they're there for him. And they're there for him with a smile, and with enthusiasm, and with gratitude for what he's given them over their lives. And he loves them both. But, unknown to the father, because he can't observe it, one son is serving him, dedicated to him out of love for him, and the other son is dedicated out of a sense of duty for his parent. So, when they get the call at 2:30 in the morning, and it's sleeting outside, they live in Chicago, and it's January, I said, please, you've got to come over to the house, you got to come and see me. The one son says, the one who's dutiful says, 2:30 in the morning, says sleep. It's my father. Okay, for my father, I do whatever he needs within reason. Certainly I'm going to come. And he has to understand that I'm happy to do it, so I'm going to put on a smile, and I'm going to greet him cheerily and thank him for the opportunity, because I do the right thing. I do the right thing. I'm dedicated to fulfilling my obligations, my duty. And he does, and he walks in with a smile, and father's happy to see him, and so forth and so on. The other son says, my father brought me into the world and showered me with his love and his concern and his commitment and his support at every stage of my life. I love him. When I hear the phone ring at 2:30 in the morning, I see his name on the screen, my heart leaps with joy. It's an opportunity to do something for my father. Maybe he needs something that I can do for him. He gets the call, he goes out into the sleet, comes to the father. Now, from the father's point of view, each one has the same smile. Each one exhibits the same enthusiasm. But in the one case, it comes from love, in the other case, it comes from duty. Now imagine this goes on for years, comes to the end of the father's life. In a few days, he's going to be gone. And now, somehow, he becomes aware of the truth, that the one son was serving him out of a sense of duty and obligation, and the other was serving him out of love. Do you think that will make any difference to the father? Will it have any effect on his feelings in any way? Any effect in terms of his relationship to the two sons in any way?
Yeah.
I mean, I hope it's obvious the father is going to have a difference in relationship to them. It's not obvious exactly how it will go. Here's one way it could go. The one who loves me, and it's true, I loved them, and I supported them, and I gave to them, and I shared with them. His loving me is the most natural thing in the world. And it's wonderful that it's there. You don't always get what's natural. You don't always receive it. I receive it. It's absolutely wonderful. The other one, there's something missing in him. There's something broken in him. He went through all of the experiences of the first son, the one who loves, and he didn't end up loving me. What's wrong? He's missing an essential element of being really human. The ability to respond to love with love. I don't think, I mean, when I'm picturing it, it's not a question of blame, but it's a question of how you understand the possibilities of human relationships. So here again, the idea is that although they do the same thing, the motivation is different, and that gives an entirely different gloss on the nature of the action. If a person were a psychologist and interviewed the two sons and saw the condition of the son who was serving out of duty and obligation, I think the psychologist could recommend therapy. Because if he underwent those experiences and didn't end up loving his father, he has a problem. Will he ever be able to love anybody else? How will he recognize it? There's something broken there. So again, the character that's expressed in what you do plays a large role in the meaning of what you do. Okay, now I want to introduce you to a Jewish idea, which is relevant here and needs some explanation. But I'll show you how it plays itself out in practice. There's a rule in serving God that the more effort you put in, the more difficulties you overcome, the more credit you deserve for what you do. I think that that's not a rule that's unique to the Jewish religion. I think it's part of human experience. Let's suppose somebody does you a favor. The mere fact that you benefited should mean that you have some gratitude, but the more he invested in doing it, the more it cost him, the more gratitude you have. So similarly, when you're serving God, if you have to overcome obstacles in serving God, then the service is worth more. If you don't, it's worth less. That's a general rule in Jewish thinking. So let's go back and think about the two sons again. Which son, the one who came to his father out of love, or the one came to his father out of duty, which one had to overcome more obstacles? The one that came out of duty. Remember, when he saw that 2:30 in the morning and his father's name on the screen, his first response was to give a groan. 2:30 in the morning, sleeting outside. He had those psychological obstacles, which he overcame to his great credit. What about the one who served out of love? When he saw the name, he said, maybe it's an opportunity to do something for my father. Yes, he wants me to come. Wonderful. Get the boots. I'm going. Sounds like, because of his attitude, he has less obstacles to overcome. Then the Jewish rule seems to be telling me that the one who serves out of duty will get more credit for what he does than the one who serves out of love. That doesn't seem to be the right conclusion. Doesn't seem to be the right answer. And indeed, it isn't the right answer, because in our literature, serving God out of love is the highest possible level that a person can achieve. And serving God out of duty and obligation is good, it's right, it's appropriate, it's just, and it's credited, but not as much. Not as much. So how are we going to overcome this rule that says the harder it is, the more credit you get? The answer is that when you talk about it's being hard, it depends upon why it's hard, what makes it hard. And here, there's sleet, it's 2:30 in the morning, he's got to drive, but what makes it hard for him is because he's not doing it out of love. That's what makes it hard. It's objectively an obstacle, but whether it's hard for you depends upon your attitude towards it. You know, if you do sports and you do exercise, if you're being training for sports, you're working hard, but you don't feel deprived, you don't feel victimized, you don't feel that you had a hard spot in life because you're training to be able to compete in sports. So it's not objectively the fact that I'm using my muscles and getting tired. That's not what makes it something that needs to be overcome. Does it contribute to something constructive or something valuable? And here, even though in terms of experience, the one that serves out of duty is harder for him. That hardness comes from his attitude. And that hardness is in comparison to the one that does it out of love. He's not going to have extra credit for that. So this means that your inner experience of it has an extremely important role to play in terms of the value of the action that you perform. I want to give one more illustration. Maybe you've heard of cognitive therapy, although now the rage is cognitive behavior therapy. Cognitive therapy has in it a principle which is, I think, to a large extent correct and very important. Let me illustrate it with an old idea. Let's say you have two people looking at life, and one's attitude towards life is, my glass is half empty. And the other's attitude towards life is, my glass is half full. What's the reality about the two glasses? They're exactly the same. Being half empty and being half full is the same. So they're looking at the same glass, but their attitudes are entirely different. This is what they call framing. How do you frame a glass which is filled up to the 50% part? Do you frame it as half full or frame it as half empty? That has a gigantic effect on your attitude towards it. I don't know if I probably did. Is there such a thing as postcards anymore? Nobody has postcards anymore. There was a piece of cardboard, and on one side there was a picture. On the other side there was it was divided in half of the address and half of the message, and you just, without an envelope or anything, you just threw it in the mail. Well, it was very cheap, and it got to the person. The picture on the side, and of course you bought the ones with beautiful pictures. Sometimes there would be a little legend at the bottom saying who made the picture. And sometimes it said, so-and-so, quadriplegic, made it by painting with his toes. I remember seeing them. Wow, here's a guy, 34, he's in an accident, from the neck down, he's paralyzed. What happens to his life? So there are two paths. One path is no mountain climbing and no dancing and no running with my children and grandchildren. And my life's over. It's just over. There's nothing, and then go into despair and die. The other attitude is, okay, my arms and legs aren't going to do it for me. What's left? And what can I do with what's left? And in this case, he was able to move his toes, and he learned how to paint with his toes. And he painted pictures. Okay, they're not hanging in the Louvre. But he's earning a living by making things of beauty that other people can appreciate. So, although the situation is objectively the same, the way you take it and what you do with it is entirely different. Now, part of life is having frames available to you to interpret a situation and relate to it. I remember hearing an interview with a junior vice president of some corporation, 25-year-old in New York, earning six figures. And they asked her, is it okay to make mistakes in business? And she said, yes, it's okay to make any mistake once. Meaning, people aren't omniscient, we're not omnipotent, we have failures of understanding, right? Anything that happens can happen, but if you don't learn from it, then you're a failure. So if you look at being a business in part as a learning process, yeah, things are going to happen. My attitude towards them isn't, I'm guilty and maybe I'm incompetent, maybe I should get out of the field, and so on and so on, but rather, what can I learn from it? I'll have a very different reaction to it. We have a principle like that. A person does not come to be confident and accurate in his Torah studies until he's tripped up by them. Tripped up, failed, made a mistake. If you can't put up with that and look at that as a normal process in development, suppose you want to learn a foreign language. If you say, when I start to speak, if I make a mistake, it's over, it's over. You're never going to get there. Of course you're going to make mistakes. or learn physics, or learn culinary arts. You're going to make mistakes. If you look at them as a positive step in your development, then they don't derail you. This is built into the idea of Jewish self-development. There's a verse that says, "Ein adam tzadik ba'oretz asher ya'aseh v'lo yechta." No one gets through life without failure. No one. Not even the greatest. They all have their failures. Moses had his failures. Abraham had his failures. King David had his failures. The question is, how do you look at it? You look at it as, okay, my next step in development is to repair this failure, and there are ways to repair it. It isn't as if you have a failure, that's on your record, and your record is stained forever. No, you can repair the failure. So that even if you have failures in the course of your life, when you get to the end of your life, you could have a perfect record. So these things are steps in one's development, which one takes with a positive frame, rather than a negative frame. You probably have heard of perfectionism. Perfectionism is a psychological disability. There's a wonderful phrase in English, the excellent is the enemy of the good. That means if you demand excellence of yourself, there are a lot of things you won't do because you don't do it excellently. Things which you could do well, even very well, but not excellent, and you and the world will lose all those things you could do very well because you're demanding excellence. That's self-defeating. So this attitude towards life is an attitude which permeates the Jewish experience. There's another element to this which I think pushes in a certain sense even a little bit deeper. I asked my Rebbe Zatzal, my spiritual mentor, about a certain practice which some Jews have, and that is from time to time to have a spiritual accounting. How am I doing? Some people who are real aficionados do it every day. So it's every week, every month. We all do it on Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, once a year. What about this practice of making a spiritual accounting? So my Rabbi Zatzal said, okay, it's a worthwhile thing to do. He didn't say I have to do it, but it's a worthwhile thing to do. But it's one condition. When you start the review of how you're doing, start with something good. Something you're proud of. Dwell on it. Don't run away from it. Dwell on it. Shine it, Bask in the glow till you feel good about yourself. Yeah, look, I have good qualities. I'm doing good things. Yes. Then ask yourself, and what could be improved? Don't let your desire to improve drag you into a general negative self-image. That's not appropriate. That's not appropriate. Basically, qualities that you have are good. Basically, the qualities are there to be used appropriately. And then there are challenges to develop them. And if there are challenges there, often the challenges aren't of your making. The challenges are circumstances, given the character that you were endowed with as you were growing up, which had nothing to do with you. There's the qualities that God put in your soul and the effect of your parents and the society and your experiences on you at a time when you weren't responsible for anything. And then you get to the age of responsibility, and now you have all these elements of your character and the circumstances you're under, and some of them are very challenging. Okay, then you look at the challenges as God-given opportunities to develop spiritual in certain ways, and you work to make the best of the circumstances that you have. So to be caught up in the failures and to come to a negative self-image is really something that's unrealistic in Jewish terms. It's something that's inappropriate in Jewish terms. And indeed, when you think about self-improvement, most people think, okay, where do I have trouble? Where are my problems? Where am I failing? What can I do to correct them? But that's not the way we normally think about self-improvement. Let's imagine that you are a whiz at putting a medium-sized ball through a basket. And on the other hand, to take a stick and hit a ball into a hole, you you miss the ball half the time. You don't try to become a professional golfer. You go into basketball because you're already talented in basketball. You invest your efforts at improvement in the things that you're already good at. The things that you aren't good at, if you can avoid them, you try to avoid them. So self-improvement doesn't have to mean facing failure and trying to overcome failure. Self-improvement can mean taking the areas where you're already talented, you're already positively endowed, and improving them. Yes, if there are failures, at some point one has to confront them and try to improve them also. But it isn't as if that's the only element in self-improvement. I think I'll say one more thing, and then maybe that'll be enough for today. I was a professor of philosophy, and I used to sometimes talk to my students about their future, what they wanted to do, and so forth and so on. When I grew up, my grandparents were immigrants to the United States. My parents were born there, and my parents were both professionals, but they didn't have college. They didn't have what we would call a college education, and they made sure that my brother and I had the college education, and we went on to do various things. So from their parents to my parents to us, there was an economic upward curve, an educational upward curve. We were able to do things that our parents and grandparents couldn't do. And we took that for granted. I started interviewing my students in the 70s, and my students said things like, "Oh, my father did ABC, I could never do that. I could never do what he did." I thought, really? We took for granted doing more than our parents did. Yeah, but their parents were, some of them in my generation, we already went to university and got PhDs. What's the child going to do beyond that? Is he going to get a PhD? Maybe yes, maybe no. The horizons went down. I heard often, I couldn't do that. I would never be able to do that. And I would say to them, you're 21 years old, and you say you'll never be able to do that? Not even 50 years from now? How could you possibly predict what you will be 50 years from now? Why close off your opportunities, close off your life, and say that could never happen? I pitied them that they didn't allow themselves dreams. Of course, you don't want to get caught up in your dreams as if they're guaranteed realities, but you don't want to go through life without dreams, because then you miss opportunities. The Torah tells us you don't know the future because there's an author, capital A, who's running history. It's not accidental, it's not random, it's not happenstance. And that means that things could happen that you can't even imagine. Things could happen, that developments could become available to you, which you can't even imagine because you can't imagine how the circumstances could change. I had a little one in my life. I'm very bad at languages. Courses I had to take in high school and college, I wouldn't have had taken any of them if it went up to me. But if I did very poorly in them. When I decided to explore traditional Judaism, it's based on another language. Actually, two of them, Hebrew and Aramaic. I thought to myself, this is really going to be tough because it's just not my skill set. I came to Israel for a year, and the program that I was in had a principle: no English, none at all, at any time. All the classes were in Hebrew. We weren't allowed, we who were on the program, weren't allowed to room together. We had to room with Israelis. It was Hebrew or drown, sink or swim. That was a gigantic gift to me. Within 3 months, I was speaking Hebrew. Within 5 months, I could talk to Israelis and I could carry on a conversation. If I had to do that from a book, I wouldn't have it now, sitting here decades later. I didn't know that was in the program. I didn't have that description of the program. But it was a gigantic gift to me. So I got a benefit which I couldn't have imagined, and it was handed to me without my even preparing for it. When you experience that a couple of times, you think, why should I put limits on what I can achieve? Sure, I have to be practical, but always have your eye open for the unexpected. The Chazon Ish says that when you believe in divine providence, one of the things you believe in is that since God is running the universe, if you have a picture of the future, here's the next year, and that's next summer, and that's hopefully 5 years from now, and 10 years from now, don't forget the box with the question mark. Because something can happen that's totally unexpected. which changes your course. You meet someone, and that someone has an impact on you and can change your whole orientation in the way you look at the world. I met my Rebbe, and I saw in him things that I had never seen in other human beings, and which I didn't associate with normal human life, normal human functioning. And I began to see a world of possibilities that I didn't dream existed. By the way, this could happen if you read a biography. You don't have to necessarily meet people, but sometimes biographies open up this. A human being could do that, could say that, could be that. One of the great rabbis of the 20th century in America, though he came from Europe, his first rabbinic appointment was in Lithuania, a small, very poor town. And after he arrived there, he found out that the town had to make a decision. They had enough money to pay for the presence of one professional in the town, and they had two options. One was a rabbi or a doctor. And they chose a rabbi. Wow. Having a doctor around is kind of important. This was in 1910 or something. So what did he do? Because he was a great thinker and he knew Russian, he got hold of a Russian medical textbook and read it through from cover to cover so that he could function as their doctor. They made the noble religious choice of choosing a rabbi rather than a doctor, so he said, I'll make sure they have both. I wouldn't have anticipated that into the story. I wouldn't have guessed that into the story. But that's how it ended. That same rabbi was going in a taxi with a friend of his, and the taxi was in New York. A taxi cab driver was listening to the radio and listening to a woman singing. There are those who feel that that's a problem. There are others who feel it's not a problem. This other rabbi felt it was a problem. So he said to this Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, perhaps we should ask the driver to turn the music off or change the music to something else. Rabbi Kamenetsky said no, because he's driving the car. Let him be happy, let him be relaxed, let him be focused, and not to have to worry about something where we're irritated. We're all in his hands. The two of us are in his hands for our safety. I don't know if I would have thought of that either. It's a religious rule. He's carrying religious people. The ride is 20 minutes. No. Think in terms of what he needs and think of the fact that we're in his hands. There's a dimension of thinking. It's like framing, but framing things in an entirely different way. I'll give you one more example from him, and then I'm going to be finished for today. There's a prayer, the traveler's prayer. It's in the Siddur. When you go on a certain type of trip out of town, there's a blessing you should say, asking God for protection. We have a rule about prayers. If you're in a situation where it's not clear whether the prayer is required or not, don't make it because you're using God's name. You don't want to take a chance of using God's name when it's not required. So, this same Rabbi Kamenetsky was being driven from Muncie to Brooklyn, I guess. And the driver was one of our graduates, an Ohr Somayach graduate. And he says to Rabbi Kamenetsky, I know there's the prayer, and I know that it's said when you make a trip, and I happen to know the trip we're taking, there's a division of opinion. Some say you do need to say it, some say you don't need to say it. And we have a rule that when you have a doubt about saying a blessing, you don't say the blessing. So I guess we shouldn't say the blessing. Rabbi Kamenetsky said, doubtful blessings aren't said, but doubts about surviving the trip mean you do say it. Oh yeah, doubts about surviving the trip. I thought to myself, when I say that prayer, why do I say it? Because it's a rule. It's in the rule book. I try to follow the rules. Yeah, it says, I do it. I take out the Siddur, I open up the page, and I say the words on the page, because that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Rabbi Kamenetsky says, you're praying to survive the trip. Hello? You're not just following a rule to recite Hebrew syllables. You're praying to survive the trip. And under those conditions, you do make the blessing. Nothing. So I thought, how often do I do things by rote? How often do I do things without thinking them through? without experiencing the real depth in them. And to him, it was obvious that that's what's going on. You hear that from people, you interact with people who are like that, and you say, they're living on a much deeper dimension than I am. And I'd like to get closer. I don't picture myself as climbing onto their dimension, but I'd like to get closer. I'd like to have more of that in my life. That's, again, a way of framing where you are, framing where you can expect to go. That's one of the things that the Torah teaches us, to meditate on the inner dimension and think of developing the inner dimension. Again, not to the exclusion of the external dimension, but in addition, it's a very important part of Jewish life. Okay.